Hello and welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we are going to talk about the respiratory system. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Although viewed as a whole, the human body is actually made up of 10 different systems. Each of these systems plays a vital part in the health and well-being of the entire body. In this video, we are going to focus on the respiratory system. The respiratory system is made up of two major components, the conducting zone and the respiratory zone. The conducting zone involves your nose, pharynx, epiglottis, larynx, vocal cords, and trachea. By the way, this is pronounced as trachea, not trachea, trachea. While your respiratory zone has the following parts, the bronchial tree, lungs, and alveoli. Alveoli is the plural form of alveolus. So alveoli, plural, alveolus, singular. The functions of your respiratory system are as follows. They allow gas exchange to take place in order to remove carbon dioxide from the blood. I hope you still remember our lesson on circulatory system that gas exchange take place in the capillaries of the alveoli of the lungs. So we will learn more about this later. They supply the blood with oxygen in order for the blood to deliver the oxygen to all parts of the body. So all the cells in our body, they require oxygen and we get it from the lungs transported by the blood. And the respiratory system also enable us to talk or to vocalize. So these are the parts of your respiratory system. It is divided into two, the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. The upper respiratory tract includes your nose, nostrils, nasal cavity where the air enters, um, your oral cavity, your pharynx, the back of your mouth, epiglottis, the flap that closes the trachea, and your vocal cords, the larynx. Okay, so whenever you get sick and your doctor says that you have an upper respiratory tract infection, so this is where URTI, so this is where the infection might have occurred. Okay, then your lower respiratory tract starts with your trachea or your windpipe. Okay, so side by side here you have your esophagus that goes to your stomach. That's why you need to have an epiglottis here to close the trachea whenever you swallow so that food will not enter the trachea. So your trachea will divide into left and right primary bronchus, singular bronchus, bronchi, plural. So trachea, left primary bronchus, right primary bronchus, and then your primary bronchus divides into smaller bronchi, similar to the branches of a tree, smaller bronchial um, arms. Okay. Then your lungs, you have two lungs, left lung and right lung. So you have a superior lobe, so that's the upper part of your lung, middle lobe, and inferior lobe. For your right lung. On your left lung, you only have superior lobe and inferior lobe. So your bronchi divides into smaller branches called bronchioles, and at the tip of your bronchioles are your air sacs. So we call that the alveoli, plural, alveolus, singular. So this muscle at the bottom of your rib cage, where your lungs are sitting on top of, is your muscular diaphragm. Okay, so the action of the diaphragm is the reason why we can actually breathe. So more about that later. So these are the parts of your respiratory system. To explain further how the respiratory system functions as well as the names of the anatomical parts, I recommend you watch this video entitled Science Respiratory System. I will provide the link in the description below. So now let's go into the components of the respiratory system. So the first one is the conducting zone. So this includes the structure that conduct or transport air from the atmosphere into the respiratory zone. So we've discussed a while ago, this includes your upper respiratory tract and your lower respiratory tract. So that involves your nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, primary bronchi. Okay? So they bring air into the lungs, okay, into the respiratory zone. So aside from that, they also function in warming the air, humidifying it, filtering it, and cleaning the inspired air. So that's the reason why we have cilia, we have hair inside our nostrils. So they also act in filtering and cleaning the inspired air. So when we say inspired air, so that's the air that goes into the lungs. Okay? So these are the parts of the conducting zone. So we've talked about this. So those are the ones in green, while the ones in red are your respiratory zone. So your conducting zone, so the first one is the nose. So this is where the air enters. The nose filters it and removes the dirt and also warms it up so that our lungs will receive the air in appropriate temperature. And your sense of smell, your olfactory sense, olfactory glands are also found in the nose. The pharynx is the tube that carries the air down to the windpipe, and it also shares the pathway for food. Okay, so this is the back of your mouth. So this is where the air goes in, and then when you swallow, this is also where the air goes in. So it carries the food. It carries the food and air in a downward direction, either to the lungs for the air and food to the stomach, to the esophagus. Again, that's why we need to have the epiglottis. It is a leaf-shaped piece of cartilage. It's not a bone, just a piece of cartilage that covers the top of the larynx. So whenever you swallow, the epiglottis automatically closes the trachea. Okay? It automatically closes the flap. So if you're sitting at home right now, try to swallow and breathe at the same time. It will be very difficult because the epiglottis automatically closes the larynx, the entrance to the trachea, whenever we swallow. That's why whenever we're talking and then we're breathing at the same time, sometimes, the epiglottis lags behind. So food particles can go into the lungs, resulting us to cough it out. Okay? Nothing but air should enter the trachea. Next, the larynx. This is the voice box. It sits on top of the trachea. So it has a bone of cartilage that you can feel. You can touch it now in front of your throat. So this is more prominent in man, and they call it the Adam's apple. So women, we also have voice box, the larynx. However, it's not as big as man. So as men's. So the larynx or the voice box allows us to vocalize whenever air enters and leaves the trachea. So the voice box is found here. Then inside the larynx are your vocal cords. This is at the center of the larynx. So this allows us to make sounds whenever we sing, talk, cough, or hum. So these are folds of membrane lining that vibrates whenever air flows in and out of them. So I've mentioned a while ago, the larynx is usually larger than in men than in women, making their voice deeper than ours. The trachea or the windpipe is the one that transports air from the upper respiratory tract into the lungs. Okay, so the trachea or windpipe takes air from the vocal cords to the lungs. So as you can see here, it still has cartilage. That's not a bone. It's not as hard as a bone, but not as soft as a muscle. So the cartilage allows the trachea to always be open. Okay, so it gives a support to the trachea so that it will not collapse on itself. So the trachea connects the larynx to the respiratory zone. So the respiratory zone is the site of gas exchange. Okay, the gas exchange between oxygen and carbon dioxide. So the respiratory bronchioles, those are the smaller bronchi branches, And alveolar ducts, so alveoli, those are the air sacs, are responsible for 10% of the gas exchange, while the alveoli, those are the actual grape-like, they look like small grapes, you will see later. The alveoli are responsible for the 90% of gas exchange. So we've seen this in circulatory system. We've discussed this that gas exchange happens in the capillaries of the alveoli. So as you can see here, the red blood cells, so the capillaries are very, very thin blood vessels. So that so thin that the red blood cells can only enter in a single file, okay, one at a time. Okay, so here the red blood cells enter as deoxygenated. It means that they have very low oxygen level. But as they pass through the alveoli, they get to absorb oxygen and then they leave as oxygenated red blood cells. So these are the parts of the respiratory zone, the bronchial tree, the lungs, and the alveoli. So I recommend that you watch this video from TED Ed, What Do the Lungs Do, to give you a better understanding on the respiratory zone. I will provide the link in the description below. So here are the parts of the respiratory zone. So the first one will be your bronchial tree. So they start off from the end of the trachea into your left primary bronchus and right primary bronchus. From the primary bronchi, they branch off into smaller bronchi and then until you get the smallest bronchioles. So they are called bronchial tree. This entire structure is called the bronchial tree because they look like the roots of a large tree. So at the tip of the bronchi, the smaller bronchioles, you have your lungs, okay? So the lungs is actually made up of tiny grape-like, they look like small grapes, hanging at the edge of a stem. So they look like a bunch of grapes. So this is actually the alveoli or air sacs of the lungs. And so this is where the capillaries are located, and this is the site of gas exchange. If you still remember our lesson on circulatory system. So the left and right lungs are about the same size, except that the left lung has an indentation, or it has a deeper part that allows that allows room for the heart to rest. So at the tip of your so at the tip of your smaller bronchioles are air sacs or grape-like alveoli. And again, that is where gas exchange take place. So as you can see here, the blood vessel capillary is actually wrapped around. It's wrapped around the air sacs. Okay, and as blood cells pass through, that is where the gas exchange take place. So they leave behind carbon dioxide molecules, and then the red blood cells pick up the oxygen molecules, turning them into oxygenated blood. So they will return back to the heart to be pumped towards the rest of the body. So in the alveoli, this is where the molecules are exchanged. So there. So how do we breathe at all? So breathing is different from respiration. So respiration is this process, gas exchange. Okay, exchange for carbon dioxide to get oxygen. But breathing is actually a mechanical process. Okay, so breathing is a mechanical process that moves the air in and out of the lungs, as you can see here. So aerobic organisms, so that includes humans, these are organisms that require oxygen to release energy via respiration in the form of metabolic processes, in the form of metabolism called cellular respiration of energy-rich molecules such as glucose. So physical respiration, so that's the movement of air in and out of the lungs, while cellular respiration refers to the breakdown of food molecules to get the energy in the form of ATP. This will be tackled in the third quarter under the lesson on bioenergetics, or the transfer of energy or flow of energy. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So breathing is actually the only process that delivers oxygen to the body and also removes carbon dioxide. So as you can see here, this is how we breathe. Do you still remember that muscle diaphragm? So as the diaphragm goes lower, or as it contracts, at the same time, the rib cage also enlarges. So that creates a negative pressure, similar to a vacuum. A vacuum that forces air to enter, like a vacuum, it forces air to enter the lungs. That's why you do not have to shovel air into your nose as you take in your breath. The air will just automatically be sucked in. It's because of the action of the diaphragm and the rib cage. So that's for your breathing in or inspiration. So when you expire or when you exhale, so the diaphragm will relax, go back to its original size. Then the rib cage will contract, so it will squeeze the lungs to push the air out. So inhalation, exhalation. Negative pressure, positive pressure, sucking in air, squeezing air out. So that's how we breathe. We see here another diagram showing us the negative pressure breathing. So this happens in mammalian body, specifically in the human body. So what happens here is, again, no, the diaphragm contracts or moves downward. The rib cage expands as the rib muscles contract. This creates a negative pressure within the lungs, allowing air to rush in, okay, rush into our lungs. Okay, so this happens during inhalation. Now, during exhalation, the diaphragm relaxes or moves upward. The rib cage gets smaller as the rib muscles relaxes, and this pushes the air out. Okay, this squeezes the lungs and pushes the air out of the body. This happens during exhalation. To learn more about how breathing works, I recommend this TED-Ed video. I'll provide the link in the description below. So again, diaphragm, it is that muscle, okay? A sheet of internal muscle that extend across the bottom of the rib cage. It separates the thoracic cavity, so that's everything that contains the heart, lungs, and ribs, from the abdominal cavity, stomach, intestines, and other internal organs. It also, as we've mentioned previously, performs an important function in respiration. So again, a review, this is how we breathe in. The diaphragm um, helps us in that process. So as the diaphragm goes down, then the chest or the rib cage expands. It creates a negative pressure, a vacuum-like action that allows air to rush in. Okay? So by breathing out, so inspiration or inhalation is the movement of air from the atmosphere into the lungs, into the alveoli. But when we exhale, the diaphragm, okay, relaxes. The chest also relaxes. So it pushes the air out of the lung. It squeezes. It squeezes the air out of the lungs back into the atmosphere. So exhalation, expiration is the movement of the air out of the airway back into the environment. So this movement is called breathing. So inhalation, chest expands, diaphragm goes down, vacuum-like structure, air into the lungs. Exhalation, the diaphragm relaxes, the chest relaxes, it squeezes the air out of the lungs, the air goes out. So let's trace the pathway of air. Okay, it starts off from the atmosphere into your nose, down to your pharynx, into your larynx, vocal cords, down to your trachea, then left and right primary bronchus, into your smaller bronchioles, into the alveoli, in the air sacs where gas exchange will take place here, and then air will be squeezed out during exhalation back to your primary left and right primary bronchi, into your trachea, out of your larynx, out of your pharynx, out of your nose. So let's try again the pathway of air, but this time with animation. So air from the atmosphere will enter through in the process of inhalation will enter the air will enter the nose, down to your pharynx, down to your trachea, then left and right bronchioles, left and right bronchi into the smaller bronchioles, into the alveoli, where gas exchange will take place. So the red blood cells will leave behind carbon dioxide and pick up oxygen in the capillaries of the alveoli. After that, exhalation, air will be squeezed out, mostly containing carbon dioxide, out into your trachea, pharynx, epiglottis, and out of your nose. So I recommend that you watch this video, especially if you have asthma like me. How does asthma work? I'll provide the link in the description below. This one also, if you're interested, why do we hiccup from TED Ed, linked in the description below. How cigarettes or smoking cigarettes negatively affect the body. I'll provide the link in the description below. And how to perform a CPR in case of an emergency. Again, linked in the description below. So let's try this short pop quiz on the different parts of the lungs. So you have number one, your bronchus. So this is your left primary bronchus and this is your right primary bronchus. Trachea or windpipe and then bronchioles. Then alveoli at the tip of your bronchioles where gas exchange takes place. The grape-like air sacs, alveoli, plural, alveolus, singular. To learn more about diseases of the human body, specifically diseases of the respiratory system, I recommend that you visit this lecture PDFs from the online library. I'll provide the link in the description below. That ends our video. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.